Snow Treasure, Chapter 16. Peter chuckled to himself. The commandant didn't know that Mr. Anders, the schoolmaster, had joined the Norwegian army, had gone away to fight. There would be no school, no matter what the commandant ordered. But that was reckoning without that resolute individual. There would be a school if a German officer had to teach it, the grown folks had been told. When they first heard of the new order, they sent a committee to tell the commandant about Mr. Anders, and such was his reply. When Peter came back from the Holmes farm the next day, he saw German soldiers posting notices throughout the town. They had nailed long white handbills to the church door and on the post office and on the very school itself. Now they were putting additional ones on the light poles. The handbills were printed in Norwegian. They said that all must go about their lives as before the German occupation. Fishing and canning must be commenced as soon as the weather permitted. The soil must be planted as fully as in former times. Above all, the notices told, the children must return to school. Nothing more quickly demoralizes a civilian population than to have its children idle, the notices proclaimed. Peter watched the soldiers at work. Everything they did was neat and thorough. They brought their own tools, even to a short ladder. A corporal and a squad of 8 marched to a corner, saluted stiffly, and divided into groups. Thus they went about their tasks, informing the people of Ryswick the will of the German force of occupation. One of the soldiers was the blue-eyed private Peter had noticed the first day the Germans had come to Norway. He looked wistful then, and today seemed sadder than ever. It was as if he hated sending the children back to their books. "Hello," he said shyly in Peter's own language, but, of course, Peter could not reply. And seeing him close, Peter thought he looked younger than the others. He would be 20 or 21 at the most, Peter fancied. To the children, the German uniform was a common enough sight, but among the grown folks it caused consternation. In truth, the Germans had stayed by themselves on the beach near their barracks, and only in rare instances had come up the mountain to the town. But if their appearance caused a commotion among the townspeople of Ryswick, they didn't show it. They chose to act as if they did not know the Germans were there. The German soldiers stared frankly, but the Norwegians walked along the streets with their heads in the air. They finished their errands hurriedly and went to their homes and stayed there. Then the minute the soldiers marched out of town, they began coming out of their houses. They gathered around the notices to study the new orders. There was a little procession to the pastry shop, the conditori. Peter saw his mother coming out of the house. He stacked his sled against the wall and ran to join her. "The notice, Mother. You've read it? It says school must open on Monday." "Yes, I know." Mrs. Lundstrom quickened her steps. Inside the conditori, a little knot of people had already gathered. They had come not so much to order the inviting-looking sandwiches, nor the delicious iced cakes and pie crust goodies, as to discuss this latest order. But there was no need for anyone to say aloud the question that was first in their thoughts. With school reopened, how are we going to get the gold to the snake? Mrs. Lundstrom felt they should be careful about discussing it and warned the others to caution. The soldiers had barely left the town. They might return. "I'll take a dozen of your raisin cookies, Fru Flack," she said, "and do be careful," she was saying when the door actually did open, and in came a Nazi recruit, "that you wrap them carefully," she finished lamely. The soldier was the blue-eyed private who had said hello to Peter. He only wanted a smorgasbord. He chose one of the open egg and herring sandwiches and asked for a cup of coffee. Then he took a seat at one of the tables by the wall, his back to the women at the counter. Fru Flack brought him his order. He began to eat his smorgasbord slowly at first, and then more rapidly. With his entrance, the many busy tongues were stilled. Not a single syllable had been spoken the entire time he was there. When his own words died away, there was complete silence. As if he realized that all eyes were on his back, he ate his sandwich and tried to drink the steaming coffee, but it was too hot. After a couple of mouthfuls, he pushed aside the cup, rose, and took his leave. "You see," Mrs. Lundstrom stretched out her hands, "I don't want to spoil your day's sales, Fru Flack, but I think it would be better if we talked about this in our homes." Peter picked up the box of pastries his mother had bought and followed her out of the door, but she did not go home as she advised the others to do. She walked along the diagonal of the town square to its opposite side and beyond to the home of Dr. Aker. She lifted the brass knocker. Marta, the housekeeper, smiled in welcome. Yes, the doctor was home. Would Fru Lundstrom and Peter come in? They entered the doctor's study, cheerful with its chintz-covered furniture and shining hearth brasses. Dr. Aker gave them a cordial welcome. "Come, sit down." His good face shone only a little less brightly than the andirons. "I'll have Marta brew you a cup of tea." Mrs. Lundstrom dropped into a deep chair the doctor drew up for her. Peter sat down beside her on a stool. "And how are you, doctor?" she asked as he fussed with the fire. "Never better, Fru Lundstrom. I think the blizzard did a lot of good to my old bones. I tell you, I feel spry." "That's just what happened to Per Garson," Mrs. Lundstrom said. "He complained constantly before the storm. Now he never mentions any pains." "Well, we old people have a way of feeling things that you young ones know nothing about. It's sort of an added sense." "Is there any sickness in the town, doctor?" Mrs. Lundstrom asked. "I must say, Fru Lundstrom, Ryswick has never had a healthier winter. I think the long cold is beneficial. It seems to have killed the germs. But I saw you going out during the blizzard. I thought someone must be very sick to get you out on such a day." "It was only to see Granny Gola. The poor soul gets pretty lonesome living by herself. She's always so glad for company, so I make it a point of seeing her twice a week. It was my day to go, and I didn't want to disappoint her." Peter's mother returned to the subject of illness, but the doctor disclaimed any for the town. "I tell you, Fru Lundstrom, a doctor has a hard time getting along in Ryswick. A healthier community you won't find anywhere on earth." The housekeeper brought in the tea tray, and Mrs. Lundstrom filled the role of hostess in pouring it out. There was buttered toast and strawberry jam, Peter saw with pleasure. "You've been out today, doctor? You read the notice?" "Yes, I read it when I went out for my walk. A good thing, too, I thought. It's best to keep the people busy, especially the children." "But, Dr. Aker, going back to school will stop—" Peter began. "Peter!" His mother silenced him. But there was something in Dr. Aker's face that told him he understood what Peter started to say. "I'd quite forgotten about that," he said. "I'd forgotten what reopening the school will mean. After school is too late, I suppose." Mrs. Lundstrom stirred her tea. The wood cracked in the fireplace. "Wait a minute, Fru Lundstrom." The doctor set his cup precisely on the tea tray. "You were asking about the sick. Now, I'm not sure I told you the whole truth. You see, we doctors don't like to alarm the townsfolk, but in the winter one can always expect some sickness." "And widespread sickness amounts to an epidemic," Mrs. Lundstrom added. "And during an epidemic, one always closes the school," Dr. Aker finished. "An epidemic! Yes, if they had to make one."